Welcome to Classic Film, Montgomery, Clift, and Other Great Actors. Today we'll be talking about Fredric March. Fredric March, greatest American actor? Is there a more versatile, talented, and natural actor than Fredric March? If you can think of one, please feel free to let me know. To my mind, Fredric March might be one of the greatest actors ever and just as brilliant in any medium, television, stage, or film. His ability to realistically mimic both popular and historical figures, along with having an equal aptitude for comedy and drama, Freddie, was able to play any role and play it well. Learn more about this prestigious but unassuming actor. Childhood. Ernest Frederick McIntyre Bickle was born August 31st, 1897 in Racine, Wisconsin. His mother was a schoolteacher and his father an elder in the Presbyterian Church, providing him a wholesome and rather pleasant childhood. Frederick, called Freddie, was of above-average intelligence, confident, and well-liked. He did quite well in school, and especially in oration, which was an extracurricular activity at school. In fact, he would be sent to statewide oratory competitions and not only medaled, but occasionally would win. It gave him a small notoriety in his hometown, where he would be written up in the local paper. Needless to say, this would be a precursor to his acting. In his youth, however, he had little thoughts of acting. He was a normal boy who enjoyed palling around with friends, attending local ball games, and playing various sports. He followed his brothers, too, to the University of Wisconsin, pursuing a degree in commerce and joining a fraternity. He also joined the school drama group and would participate in plays. Freddie did quite well in college and was even voted president one year and eventually embarked on a career in banking, which took him to New York. Unfortunately, after a short time in never-ending apprenticeship, Freddie began to question his choice of banking. While in New York, he suffered a ruptured appendix and, while convalescing, began to consider taking up a career as an actor. When he recovered, he took a leave of absence from his bank and began taking the steps to put him on the path of an acting career, such as taking headshots, finding an agent, and lurking around stage doors. He was able to start out with some extra work in film, as well as doing some modeling. Modeling in those days was quite different. Rather than snapping photographs of a model, the pictures were drawn by an actual artist, requiring holding poses for several hours. Stage roles. Freddie was able to get some small roles in a stage production called Deburau, which appeared on Broadway. He spent a great deal of his time learning the craft of acting from the leading actors. His obvious desire to learn and perfect his craft impressed the managers and led to him getting more roles. He also took acting lessons at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, where he learned mimicry, pantomime, and diction, all of which would be influential in his career. Freddie would also meet John Cromwell, an actor and sometimes director, who was able to get him into better roles. Cromwell also convinced Freddie to change his name from Fredric Bickle to Fredric March. Freddie joined a stock company in order to get more acting experience and, while touring around with the company, met a young actress named Ellis Baker. He and Ellis wound up getting engaged and then eventually married in 1921. At this time, Freddie had also signed a stage contract with his friend John Cromwell and was quite busy in various productions, getting good reviews for his work. However, all the traveling he did for the stage productions kept him away from Ellis, and his correspondence dwindled to almost nothing. Only part of the reason was the separation. The other part was the fact that he had met another actress, Florence Eldridge, and had fallen in love with her. He would request a divorce from Ellis and almost immediately thereafter married Florence in 1927. Florence and Freddie would then go on to star in many of the stage productions together. After several years in stock companies, he finally began to get some leading roles on Broadway and on the West Coast. Particularly, he was asked to play Tony Cavendish in a play called The Royal Family of Broadway, which was significant because it was based on the Barrymore family. Indeed, there was great publicity about the play because Ethel Barrymore had threatened to sue. Freddie, who played the character that represented John Barrymore, did an incredible job of mimicking Barrymore's speech and mannerisms. In fact, John Barrymore himself came to the Los Angeles performance, was most amused, and congratulated Freddie. More importantly, Paramount Pictures was also impressed by Freddie and signed him to a contract. Films, 1929 to 1931. As was common under studio system contracts, actors would produce mass amounts of films in a short time. This was because the studios were paying them a weekly rate whether they worked or not. Naturally, the studios would prefer to pay the actors for actually working, so it was not uncommon to knock off 17 movies in a mere 3 years, as Freddie did. He began with his first movie called The Dummy, 1929, and would continue on in films, playing supporting roles to either lead actors or the leading lady. Many of these quickly made pre-code movies were light romantic comedies, drawing room comedies, you might say. But Freddie did have a couple quality films in this period, though few really gave him the opportunity to showcase his range in acting. He worked with many of the popular leading ladies of the day, such as Claudette Colbert, Clara Bow, and Nancy Carroll, who was a quite popular star at the time. He also worked with pioneering woman director Dorothy Arzner in several films. Some of his quality films included Sarah and Son, 1930, and Laughter, 1930, not to mention the now film version of The Royal Family of Broadway, 1930, wherein he reprised his role of Tony Cavendish. Freddie was nominated for his first Best Actor Academy Award for this film. At this point, it seemed Freddie was doomed to the fate of Melvyn Douglas, a handsome leading man that was continually cast in the same drawing room romantic comedies. Happily for all of us, and especially Freddie, Ruben Mamoulian, scheduled to direct a new version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, 1931, asked specifically for Freddie as the dual lead. He was met with opposition from Paramount, who felt Freddie was incapable of playing such a dramatic role. Ruben insisted, and reluctantly, Freddie was given the role. Needless to say, this role changed the trajectory of Freddie's career and showed how versatile an actor he truly was. Freddie has an ability to not just transform his face, but to transform himself completely. Voice, mannerisms, gait, etc. It's a quality not many actors are blessed with. He had to endure hours of makeup, and even worse, the makeup was remarkably painful, and he was actually hospitalized after this picture to heal the damage to his face. He stars in the film with notorious scene stealer Miriam Hopkins, who was an established star. March is terrifying as Hyde and is able to convey the emotional damage done to Dr. Jekyll throughout. Some consider this his best performance in a career full of amazing performances. Freddie was again nominated for Best Actor Oscar and, though he won by 1 vote, had to share the victory with Wallace Beery due to some odd rule at the time. 1932 to 1940. After his breakthrough performance in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Freddie began getting much better quality roles and scripts. In fact, the 1930s had many of his best films. His first couple films in 1932 were proof that he had made it to the upper echelon, starring with MGM queen Norma Shearer in Smiling Through, which also starred Leslie Howard, and being directed by the acclaimed Cecil B. DeMille in Sign of the Cross, pairing him again with Claudette Colbert. Freddie starred with Carole Lombard and a young Cary Grant in The Eagle and the Hawk, 1933, and returned to comedy with Design for Living with Miriam Hopkins and Gary Cooper. Later in 1933, he gave another of his greatest performances in the film Death Takes a Holiday. Critics were in agreement, more than one claiming this to be Fredric March's greatest role, probably to date though. Freddie went on to several excellent costume period pieces in 1934, The Barretts of Wimpole Street, Les Miserables, and Anna Karenina with Greta Garbo. Though Freddie didn't especially love donning these period costumes, he was equally as effective in each of the roles. In 1935, Freddie starred in a movie called The Dark Angel with Merle Oberon. This movie is about 2 men, March and Herbert Marshall, who had been friends since childhood. They also have a longtime friend in the neighbor girl as well. As they reach adulthood, both men are in love with the girl, Merle. The men go off to war. When they return on furlough, Freddie's character finally gets up the nerve to profess his love to Merle's character. They agree to marry and have to tell Herbert's character, who bravely congratulates them, putting his own feelings aside. Merle and Freddie run off to the preacher to get married, only to find out they won't have time to get the license before Freddie has to go back to his platoon. Freddie and Herbert return to war and are involved in an explosion, leading Herbert to believe Freddie is dead. The news is passed on to Merle, who is devastated. Meanwhile, we find out that Freddie is not dead, but has been rendered blind. As he returns to his home, he realizes he will be burdening Merle and refuses to get off at his stop. He winds up living with a family that takes care of him, becoming a writer and making friends with the 3 children. However, a meddling friend from the armed forces finds out that Freddie's old friends are nearby and notifies them of Freddie's whereabouts. At this point, Merle has gotten engaged to Herbert, and this armed forces friend tells Freddie of their engagement. He then lets him know that he invited them, much to Freddie's distress. Freddie contrives to set up the room in order to pretend he is not blind. When Merle and Herbert arrive, they are bewildered by Freddie's behavior. The movie itself is not anything special, but Freddie's performance, first as a blind person, and secondly in his remarkable ability to subtly portray emotional suffering. Freddie then went on to make such notable films as Mary of Scotland, 1936, with Katharine Hepburn and directed by John Ford, and Anthony Adverse, 1936, with Olivia de Havilland. In 1937, Freddie embarked in another standout film, a role in A Star is Born as Norman Maine. Though this movie has been remade several times, Freddie's Norman Maine stands out, as you see the slow progression of his career decline and his battle with alcoholism. Freddie was again lauded for his performance and nominated for an Academy Award for Best Actor. Freddie followed this up with a cute comedy called Nothing Sacred, 1937, with the screwball comedy queen herself, Carole Lombard. He also starred in another Cecil B. DeMille picture, The Buccaneer, 1938. Communism charges. The end of the 1930s saw trouble brewing, with Freddie and Florence's name coming up on the House Un-American Activities Committee, along with numerous other actors. Most of these actors did not support communism in any way, but simply belonged to the Democratic political party. Though the charges would be dropped initially, this issue would be raised again a decade later when an article was printed defaming the Marches again as communists. Freddie took to making a public speech in his defense and indeed got the paper to print a retraction and an apology. The Marches were luckier than some others, notably John Garfield, who was forced to testify and name names. However, Freddie did experience a downturn of movies directly after the allegations in the late 1940s. 1940 to 1950. Freddie began 1940 with a film starring Joan Crawford and directed by George Cukor called Susan and God, which was a comedy and also co-starred a young actress named Rita Hayworth. He made several other films before another noted film, I Married a Witch, 1942, a cute romantic comedy which also starred Veronica Lake and Susan Hayward. Freddie then decided to go back to the stage for a couple of years, starring in a long-running and critically acclaimed play by Thornton Wilder, The Skin of Our Teeth. Freddie starred in this play with his wife Florence. Indeed, he almost always starred with Florence in any of his stage productions. Also in this play was unpredictable and notorious Tallulah Bankhead, who would frequently cause trouble with the director, Elia Kazan, or other cast members. Another member of the cast was a very young Montgomery Clift. This play was quite successful, possibly due in part to Freddie's star power, as the play itself often left audiences confused. In 1944, Freddie again undertook a challenging role, playing Mark Twain in The Adventures of Mark Twain. His skill at mimicry is again in the forefront as he is transformed, voice, posture, and look, into Mark Twain. In fact, Mark Twain's daughter was originally asked to endorse the film and stipulated that she would only do so if Fredric March played her father. After seeing the performance, she wrote to March telling him it was as if she was seeing her father again. The mid-1940s were some great years for Fredric March, as on the heels of his performance as Mark Twain came one of his best films ever, The Best Years of Our Lives, 1946. This film co-starred Dana Andrews, Myrna Loy, Teresa Wright, and Virginia Mayo. It's a gripping tale of the difficulties returning war veterans faced in readjusting to society. Freddie's character highlights this by finding his children grown up and obviously feeling awkward with his wife and home life. He takes to drink and makes things even more uncomfortable. He is also hired back at his bank, but it's clear he's changed his perspective, occasionally to the concern of his boss. The best thing about this film is that director William Wyler had heard a story about a war veteran who had lost both of his hands in an explosion and had to be fitted with hooks, which he learned to use quite successfully. Wyler decided he wanted one of his characters to have the exact same handicap. In fact, he became so obsessed with the idea that he actually sought out the soldier who had sustained these injuries and brought him on to do the role himself, with zero acting experience. Not only did the soldier, Harold Russell, give a great performance, but he actually won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. Freddie won as well for Best Actor, putting him in a rare company of actors who had won 2 Oscars. In fact, this film won 9 Oscars and is considered one of the greatest films ever. The remainder of his films in the late 1940s are not especially remarkable. Again, this possibly from the effect of the communist allegations, and he was having much more success on the stage, winning a Tony Award for his role in the play years ago. The story of Ruth Gordon's quest for stardom eventually made into a film starring Spencer Tracy entitled The Actress. 1950 to 1960. Freddie didn't ever go for too long without making a quality film, and he started out the 1950s with an especially good one, Death of a Salesman, 1951. Arthur Miller had previously wanted Freddie to star in this when it was playing on Broadway, but he had refused. Freddie had regretted turning down the role and was more than happy to accept the film role. Again, Freddie was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Actor, his 5th and final nomination, which is somewhat unbelievable when thinking about a film that's lurking in the future. After this film, Freddie did some television work and put out a couple movies here and there. He reprised his role of Tony Cavendish again on television this time. The role had now been performed on all mediums, stage, screen, and television, and received an Emmy nomination for his work. He also starred in an ensemble film, Executive Suite, 1954, which is a boardroom drama boasting such A-listers as Barbara Stanwyck, Walter Pidgeon, Paul Douglas, Shelley Winters, William Holden, and June Allison. Freddie plays a very unlikable character in this film, the unemotional company controller who has high ambitions that he begins to pursue after the unexpected death of the company president. However, being generally disliked by the other board members, he is forced to use threats and bribery to seal his nomination. Though not acclaimed as some of his other work, it is nevertheless one of my personal favorites and well worth watching. The 1950s finished up with 2 notable performances. One was another role in a play, James Tyrone in A Long Day's Journey into Night, which provided him another Tony for Best Actor, making him only one of 2 actors to ever win 2 Tonys and 2 Oscars. The second was a film, The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit, 1956, starring alongside Gregory Peck and Jennifer Jones, which was quite popular with audiences, and Freddie was critically praised for his role. 1960 to 1970. 1960 saw Freddie in one of the greatest courtroom dramas ever made, Inherit the Wind. You can call me biased if you like, because this is one of my most favorite films ever. This film deals with a very sensitive premise, evolution versus the Bible. The star power in this movie is really something. We get to see 2 acting heavyweights doing battle, Spencer Tracy and Fredric March. Also in this film is Gene Kelly, mostly known for his light musicals, who acquits himself quite well in a dramatic role. Florence is also in this film as well, playing Freddie's wife. In fact, she gives an excellent performance. Freddie is almost unrecognizable in this role as the religious and political zealot brought in to help prosecute a local teacher who dared to teach evolution in a strongly Bible Belt-type town. Spencer Tracy is another noted and famous lawyer brought in by the defense, who actually had previously worked with Freddie's character and had been friendly with he and his wife. This film is worthwhile alone, simply watching 2 greats at the top of their game. Though Spencer gives his usual wonderful performance injected with some humor, however, Freddy gives more complexity to his character, a self-righteous, gluttonous, religious celebrity who little by little shows signs of self-doubt and weakness. I would be hard-pressed to come up with another film in which two such phenomenal actors went toe-to-toe, and it's what makes this already good film great. To me, it's amazing that Freddy wasn't again nominated for an Oscar for this role. Although I would never argue about Spencer Tracy being nominated for an Oscar, I truly think Freddy gives the better performance on this film. The mid to late 1960s had a couple more good films by Freddy. The first was 7 Days in May, 1964. This is a political thriller film with Freddy starring as a fictional president. This movie also stars such box office stars as Kirk Douglas, Burt Lancaster, and Ava Gardner. This is yet another film where Freddy is able to convey emotional anguish throughout his performance, something he always excelled in. The second was Hombre, 1967, starring Paul Newman, a genre known as revisionist Western. This is another film where Freddy played a rather despicable character. 1970s. Freddy was stricken with prostate cancer and had surgery in 1970. Naturally, this caused a halt in his acting. He did have a film released, a crime drama, Tick, 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 1970. This movie starred retired football great Jim Brown, who had already made an impact in the film The Dirty Dozen. Though ill with cancer, Freddy still managed to perform in a marathon film, The Iceman Cometh, 1973, adapted from a critically acclaimed Eugene O'Neill play. This film also has another all-star cast, Lee Marvin, Robert Ryan, and a young Jeff Bridges. Though to me rather stagey, long, and with far too much dialogue, nevertheless, the two greatest performances in this film come from Robert Ryan and Fredric March, both sadly terminally ill with cancer during production. Indeed, Robert Ryan would not even survive to see the film release. Freddy was exhausted and ill, but would still give an incredible performance, even assuming a convincing Irish accent as Harry Hope. Crew would note that Freddy inspired the rest of the cast during production. The loss of a great actor. After Iceman in 1973, Freddy was very ill and confined to a wheelchair. He also heard that his brother Jack was dying and went to visit him. Jack's death in November was devastating to Freddy, and he suffered a stroke which left him partially paralyzed. In June of 1974, his cancer had returned, and in November he had had another stroke. He continued to decline until April of 1975, when he was hospitalized. He would finally pass away on April 14, 1975, having left us with some of the greatest performances ever. That's the end of Fredric March, Greatest American Actor. Please take the time to subscribe to the podcast so you can receive other podcasts about classic film actors. Also, please check out my website, Classic Film, Montgomery, Clift, and Other Great Actors, where you can read any of these podcasts in blog form.